I hope you're ready for anything. I'm Karen Wolf, one of the associates at GLCYD, where we grow the capacity of individuals and nonprofit institutions to lead our communities. It's nice to see some familiar names on our attendee list today. It means our members are aware of and utilizing this benefit of membership. If you find it's the right time for you to develop a crisis communication plan and you're a GLCYD member, you can use your 4 hours of technical assistance to work with Victoria at a later date. And for you non-members, please consider GLCYD membership for your organization. We would love to work with you. We will not be taking questions today as we only have 30 minutes, but Victoria's information will be provided on the last slide, and she would be happy to hear from you. On that note, I'm pleased to introduce you to Victoria Leonard, an associate here at GLCYD. In her role, she oversees our marketing, communications, and branding efforts. She's excited to share with you all the information she has learned about crisis communications planning through both research and real-life experience.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for today's webinar. I'm excited to talk with you about crisis communications and crisis communications planning. I'll start off with a little story of how I learned about crisis communications. So I'm involved with Marquette's 4th of July, and my first year on the committee was 4 years ago, which many of you may remember the infamous barge fire that took place, and the fireworks stopped midway through the show. And we really didn't have a plan in place on how to handle that. So that was kind of like my thrown to the fire, why crisis communications planning is so important, and how when you don't have a plan and all of these inquiries are coming from all these different directions and you don't really know what to do with it, it can get very confusing and stressful. So we're going to talk a little bit about crisis communications today, putting a plan together, things to be in it, how to work with media, all that goodness. So first up, touched on it a little bit, but what exactly is crisis communications planning? There are lots of scenarios that can qualify as a crisis within your organization. Today we're going to be focusing primarily on communication and public relations tactics that can be used to get your organization through an unexpected predicament. Some of those examples include natural disaster, sudden loss of a key employee, violence, loss of a critical funder, or organizational turmoil. Today's talk is going to be really broad, and we're going to talk about planning, but we won't address any of these specific crises. But we will look at things, a template that can be applied in the event of any of these circumstances. So some things I'll note that these are things you can do right away. Other things I'll note these are areas that you'll have to wait until you get the facts to develop. So know that some of the things we'll talk about are implementable right after this, and others you kind of have to wait for the crisis to happen because you can't really make your message until you know what's going on. So why you should take the time to plan. Like I said, these things are completely unavoidable. Natural disasters happen. And you can't tell that they're going to happen. Internal things happen. And having this plan in place helps mitigate that response time and sets you up to keep your organization in a positive light. Emotions can run high in these situations. There can be a lot of stress. So having the plan in place lets people know what to do and who's going to do it. Especially if it's a natural disaster related crisis, getting into contact with the people you need to be in contact with may be difficult. We're going to talk about things to consider when dealing with disasters just in a second here. So having your plan in place with a chain of command can help determine who needs to know what, and how to prioritize moving through that, especially if infrastructure goes down. Just some things to think through. So, creating your plan, first we're going to talk about things that you need to consider before diving in. So the variables that just a few of the variables. There are a lot of variables. Obviously, we can't talk about them all today. We'd be here for hours. But some of the variables that you should really think about is who's going to be writing this plan. You want to make sure that the right people are involved from the start. In many cases, this can be tasked to your executive director or someone in the communications role for your organization. They're going to know the existing assets that your organization can tap into. For example, do you already have an email service where you have all the media in a list and you can send them a press release? You have all of the donors in a list and you can send them an update, things like that. It's also important to get feedback from all of the different departments if you're a larger organization and make sure that they don't have things that may hold up your plan. Policies and procedures are always a good thing to double check when you're writing these things to see what's already in place to make sure that you're not creating a conflicting plan. You also may want to involve your communications committee if you have one. I know some smaller organizations might have a board committee or a volunteer committee that works on communications, so they could be involved in this process too. Make sure you think through when this plan will be used and who has the authority to enact it. It's recommended that you give this power to both your CEO and your board chair. This way, if one is available or they're involved in the crisis, there's another person that can be contacted, briefed on the situation, and put the plan into action. Safety is really important. That's the first priority in emergency situations. If you already have plans in place for emergency management, make sure you incorporate those steps into your communications plan and how it goes into effect. For example, if you suffered a structure fire and your building burns down, it's important that everyone gets out of the building and meets at the rendezvous point prior to worrying about if your crisis communications plan is in place. We want to make sure that everyone is out, everyone is accounted for, and then we can move forward with communicating about what's happening. Infrastructure. Do you know what cell phone carriers your staff and board are on? Do you have a voice over IP phone that requires internet? These are some things that you want to take into account when making your plan. If your emergency management plan has a command point or a rendezvous point, make sure you know what the capabilities that space has for technology. Knowing the network carriers of your staff and board members is really important in the event that, say, a network carrier goes down. All of those people may not have access to communication lines. For example, I don't have a landline anymore at my house. So if a crisis happened and I'm at home and my cell phone's through Verizon, Verizon's network goes down, if there's still internet, I can communicate from my computer. If not, I'm really cut off from the situation. So just know that those infrastructure things do play a role in how you're able to get your team together and working to move forward. You'll also want to make sure that everyone knows how to use the infrastructure. An example is texting. If everyone is comfortable texting, then that is a way that the team can communicate. Awesome. If not, that's something that just should be noted that we're going to communicate via conference call and not text messaging because there might be people that don't have phones that can text message. So know the capacity of the infrastructure and know the capacity of those who are using it to help to determine how best to communicate internally. Finally, you'll want to make sure you have some sort of system to access contact information for your key audiences. Now, we haven't talked about key audiences yet. We'll get there in a few minutes. But if you don't have a database, a phone list, a phone tree for these key audiences, that's something that you might want to kind of structure before you develop your plan, because the plan's going to rely on getting that information to move forward. Another thing to do is to look at plans already in place, like your emergency management plan or your human resources policies. Familiarize yourself with them. And when you're writing your crisis communications plan, know that you can have it as a standalone document or you can roll it right into things that already exist. For example, here at GLCYD, our emergency succession plan has the communications plan built right into it. The names of who will lead the organization in the event of a short or long-term absence of the CEO and how they will communicate their new role to the stakeholders is right there in the plan that gets approved every year by the board. So if that needs to be enacted, it's a document that can go to that person, and they know exactly all the steps that need to be followed for both taking over the leadership of the organization and the communication that goes into it. So there's a couple different ways you can structure your plan. Regardless of how you do it, the things we're going to talk about next are things that you'll definitely want in there. First off, who is your team? So this is part of the plan that you can assemble right away. You'll need to determine the members of the team. It is normally comprised of staff, board members, but if you're a small organization, volunteers can be included too. You'll want to make sure that the team includes individuals with different strengths that you'll need to execute the plan, including writing, editing, strategic thinking, and record keeping. You'll also want to designate a person on the team as the lead. This person will be responsible for making sure all tasks are followed through on. Now, I know what you're thinking. Easy, board chair, CEO, they can be the crisis communications team leader. But I want you to take time and think about who your spokesperson or persons are going to be before you designate that lead role to the CEO or board chair. In a lot of occasions, the CEO and or board chair fill the role of the spokesperson. The spokesperson is the only person that makes public statements to the media. I say only person, it can be two people. You want to make sure that these people are really comfortable with and familiar with talking to media. You might also want to get them some media training just in case you do have to put this plan into action. And if they're talking to all of these different media people, it might just be really time consuming, and they won't have the capacity to take on the leadership role of making sure things are getting implemented in the plan. So figure out who your spokespersons are going to be before you designate that role. Having both your CEO and board chair as spokesperson does give a little more flexibility and allows for one or the other to speak to the media. But if that's the case, you definitely want to make sure that they're both on the same page and they both know the messaging. We'll get to messaging in a few minutes. You may also want to think about adding a media liaison role. That is the person who would just field calls from the media or really anyone coming that's making a call and wants a statement. And then they connect the media with the spokesperson, whichever one is available at the time. You'll want to list that media liaison in your media kit, and we'll get to media kits in a moment as well. Make sure you have a process of how anyone besides the spokesperson handles inquiries. A common practice is to say, I'm sorry, I'm not authorized to speak with you about this, but I would be happy to connect you with, and then let them know who the spokesperson is and their contact information, and even do maybe a conference call to get them connected and then leave so the statement can be made. But be as helpful as possible. Make sure that your staff are being helpful, your board's being helpful. If they aren't authorized to talk, make sure that they know who and how to connect. All right, key audiences. So there's a lot of them that you can identify. These are audiences of stakeholders in your organization. Common examples include your board, staff, donors, key collaborators, media. I didn't list them, but volunteers is another great one. In your plan, you want to address where the contact information for each of these groups can be found. You'll also potentially want to prioritize these lists, maybe even make a phone tree for audiences like your board or staff. So if the plan does get enacted, maybe 2 board members are contacted who each call 4 board members, and then we know everyone's up to speed instead of having one person having to call everyone. It's important that all key audiences are addressed in a transparent way. There's a really great book that the Michigan Nonprofit Association put together. It's called the Michigan Nonprofit Management Manual. And in my research on this stuff, I found this paragraph, and I just think it really highlights the importance of transparency. So I'm going to read it for you. It says, "Silence breeds media and other donor hostility and loss of public confidence. Fear of legal action has made many boards choose to remain silent to limit liability when in crisis. While in the for-profit world, this philosophy is still in place, in the nonprofit community where the public, volunteers, clients, and donors are the stakeholders, we must respond strategically to protect and, if necessary, rebuild our image. You do not need to reveal more than necessary, but truth is foremost. I think that really sums up the big things that can go wrong with addressing these audiences if you're being secretive. If they don't feel in the loop, it's really easy for gossip and rumors to start. And in the age of social media, we know that that can be catastrophic. They can run rampant. And you'll have a lot more work on your hands than if you were transparent from the beginning. You want to make sure that you're out in front of the situation. Be the one to break it to the news. Don't let it get there without you being the one to tell them about it. Same thing with your donors. You don't want your donors to hear about it, reading the newspaper, or watching the TV, or going on social media and seeing it. You want to make sure that those that need to know first are the ones that you're contacting first. And then, like I said, that prioritized list, working your way down. You'll also want to make sure that you're continually updating these audiences. In the time of a crisis, it's not likely that it's a one and done communication. Be prepared to notify when you'll next be contacting the audience. So you could say, I'm going back to my burning building example. You might let everyone know, hey, there was a structure fire. Our staff and everyone made it out safe. Everything is good. The next day, it could be just an email update saying, hey, we have our temporary location. We plan to be here for the next 2 weeks. You can reach us at, and then the address, the phone number, however you want that. So just know that there is a continual updating process, and keeping your audience abreast of new developments is really key in that transparency area. Messaging. So this is the tricky part. A crisis isn't something that you're really planning for and can foresee coming in the long-term future. So it can be difficult to come up with your messaging before it happens. So these are some of the things you should have, but they aren't necessarily things you can craft right now. Your summary statement, it's a transparent paragraph that summarizes the facts, the things that you know. It's what your spokesperson uses to explain the situation. It can be sent to your audiences in electronic form if you feel that that's a good way to do it. It can be posted on social media. Print media can pull quotes from it. Make sure it's clear and complete. You'll want it to be in your organization's voice, but keep it positive. This is not a statement that places blame on anyone. It's a way to say, this is what happens, and this is how we plan to move forward. When you're sharing the summary statement, especially if you're making phone calls with people, you're going to get questions. I think it's human nature that we want to have as much information as possible, so we ask questions. So if you keep track of those questions, you'll be able to put together a question and answer sheet. It's a great place to get into short but specific details. So you'd take the questions that you've heard from people, you would write them down into this prepared document, you would answer them short, to the point, truthfully, factually, positively, and transparently. And then you'd be able to give it to your spokesperson, and that's where they would have kind of their canned answers for when those questions come up again. If you're facing a crisis that does potentially have legal ramifications, make sure you run these by your attorney prior to going public, and check with your human resource policies to see if there's anything limiting what you're able to say. I know a lot of times for personnel matters, those aren't discussed publicly. So that could be something that the message is, we don't discuss personnel matters publicly. Lastly, a press or media kit. This is a great opportunity to put one together if you don't have one. It includes a brief overview of your organization, your mission, a downloadable logo, your annual report, key staff bios, contact information, photos, anything that can help the media and press have a better understanding of who you are without having to contact you to get that information. You can put it right out on your website under Contact Us, have a separate link for the press or media kit. You can interchange those words. And then you'll have all of that in a place where you can say, and if you need it, our media kit is available online, download what you need. So that makes it really easy. and something that you won't have to worry about. All right. Finally, media outlets. You can add a section specifically on working with the media to your plan. This allows anyone who has the plan to move forward. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen in crisis. It would be great if the communications person is involved, but if for some reason they can't be, having this all in one area would make it easy for anyone who picks it up to move forward with it. It would include a list of regional media outlets with information on who to contact and how is best to contact them. There could also be a section that includes under which circumstances you would have a press briefing or press conference versus issuing a press release. Things to think about when setting this stipulation would be how much information you're releasing. You don't want to send, a 10-page press release. That would be something where a press conference would be the better option. There's a lot of information. But how much preparation time do you have? With a press conference, really you want to give the press a full day's notice if possible. I know in some of these situations, you need to move right away, and in that case, roll with the press release. And are you ready to take questions? A lot of times, briefings or press conferences do allow for reporters to answer questions. If you're at a place where the facts aren't clear yet and you're not ready to take questions, a press conference or press briefing might not be a good option. So with questions, a lot of times you'll hear people talk about or say, no comment on that matter, period. That's the end. And that's a really easy way to not answer a question. But it kind of has this context to it that you're guilty. That's just the way it's played out and the way that it's portrayed. It kind of has that really negative, I did something wrong type vibe to it. And I don't think that's what you want. So if there's a reason that you can't answer the question, state the reason. It's useful when there's, or it can be used when there's pending litigation or a personnel issue like we talked about earlier. Our human resource policy does not allow us to discuss personnel issues, or I'm happy to issue a comment once litigation is over. These are ways that you can say, hey, I'm not commenting on it without saying no comment. So you'll just want to address in your plan under what scenarios can we not talk about things, and when will we be issuing those policy-based decisions. So tips for getting the word out. Right now, some things you can be doing are building relationships with the media in your area. Know your media market, know who your TV stations are, know who your newspaper is, know who your radio stations are. Get to know them and their deadlines and what they need. So each type of media, I'll talk about tips on the next slide about what production needs they have, but know their deadlines. If you have a monthly newspaper, they might have a firm deadline and they only publish once a month. So if you miss that deadline, you're not until the next month, and the crisis could totally be over by then, and you might not want to remind people of it. So that might not be the best media outlet for you to use. Write in AP style. That's kind of the general style that the press uses. So familiarize yourself with and use AP style. And know that federal and state news flows do disrupt some of the things that happen in our local communities and the coverage they get. If you have breaking news the day of the presidential election, you probably aren't going to get a lot of coverage. But a few days later, after the dust settles, maybe you will. I know that you can't really control when the crisis happens, but if it's something that's not a huge emergency, it's okay to wait a day to let the press know. If you've talked to your donors, it will probably get to the press, but they're going to be really busy with other things, so they probably won't cover it. So working with the specific press mediums, there's kind of some ways that you can tweak your message when sending it out to make it easy for the receiving agencies to use. When working with print media, it's helpful to include quotes and photos of your press releases, or in your press releases. This will allow the print media to pull the quote directly without having to call and interview you. The photos should be accompanied with a caption or cut line that gives the information on what's happening in the image, along with the names and titles, if applicable. Radio strength is that it's very, very good at conducting live interviews. You can get your spokesperson on a morning show to publicly address what's happening in your organization if you get to that point. They're also really great with reading short updates during the morning news sections. So if you're able to condense your press release down to just key points, you can send that to radio, and that's a way to broadly update the community as an audience if there's someone that you want to be updated. TV, it's a really active medium. If a reporter's coming to you, make sure there's some sort of action that they can record, having props or displays that they can get some B-roll of. B-roll is that footage that if you see someone getting interviewed and then they cut to like a kid playing soccer or whatever, that's B-roll. So just action that can be used and they can do voiceover on. You'll want to be really specific with availability. If you're working with TV, you'll want to let them know the exact time frame that your spokesperson is available. And if your spokesperson isn't available for an interview, don't invite the TV reporter over. They aren't going to be able to get a good story without having someone that can talk to them about what's happening. And then bloggers. If there's a local blog that people read that covers news, you may want to alert them and include them in updating on the crisis. And I think that it's easy to think, oh, they do a lot on Facebook, so I'm going to send them a Facebook message. And if you do that, make sure you share your offline contact information. So they may want to call you and discuss with you instead of messaging back and forth on Facebook. So, and if you've used Facebook Messenger with a business page, they only get your public information public information. And a lot of people don't publicly list their phone number on Facebook. So making sure that you include even an email address could be helpful. Just other ways that they can contact you besides via Facebook Messenger if they need to reach out and clarify any questions. All right, 3 minutes left. I'm doing good. Additional resources. So as I was pulling together crisis communications plans, there were 2 resources that really stood out. I will send the links in the follow-up email to everyone. These are both downloadable PDFs. They have worksheets and stuff to help you think through some of the things we discussed today on the webinar. And so they are Surviving a Crisis, a practical strategies for nonprofit organizations from the Nonprofit Insurance Alliance Group, and the Crisis Communication Plan Nonprofit Toolkit from the Colorado Nonprofit Association. And it's actually on the Council of Michigan Foundation's website as well. There's a link to it. So if you've listened today and you're like, yes, I want to dive deeper and make this communications plan, I totally recommend looking at these 2 resources. I looked through a lot of them. These 2 were what I thought to be the strongest. And like I said, I will make sure you guys get those links in the follow-up email that will have the recording and the evaluation. So with that, yeah, it's 10:29, so we aren't going to be able to take any questions, but my contact information is up on the screen. Please feel free to copy it down, give me a call, shoot me an email, connect however you want. If you have any questions, you want to sit down and discuss what may be happening within your organization and how to make that into a plan, and I would be more than happy to meet with you. So thank you so much for attending. I hope everyone learned something, got a little tidbit that they didn't know about, or if you do have a communications plan, a crisis communications plan in place, I hope this kind of reaffirmed that you're on the right track. So with that, thank you again for attending and have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. Bye.